On the outskirts of a forgotten village, perched atop the misty Raven Hill, stood an abandoned house rumored to be cursed. The villagers spoke in whispers about its dark past, disappearances, strange lights, and a history of unexplainable horrors. One stormy evening, a young historian named Evelyn arrived in the village. Drawn by tales of the house, she intended to document its story, dismissing the warnings as folklore. Armed with a flashlight, her notebook, and a camera, she began her ascent to the house. Inside, the air was damp and filled with the faint smell of decay. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, revealing claw-like scratches beneath. Evelyn noticed an old mirror hanging crookedly in the hallway, reflecting the dim flicker of her flashlight. But when she turned to inspect it, a shadowy figure darted across the reflection behind her. Startled, Evelyn spun around. The hallway was empty. She whispered to herself, "It's just the storm, nothing more." But the creaks in the floorboards above told a different story. She climbed the stairs, each step echoing into the oppressive silence. Reaching the second floor, Evelyn found a child's room. The bed was neatly made, but the air was cold enough to see her breath. A box of toys sat in the corner, untouched by time. She reached for an old wooden jack-in-the-box. As she turned the handle, a haunting lullaby played. It stopped abruptly, and the jack burst out, not as a clown, but as a grotesque figure with hollow eyes and sharp teeth. The room's door slammed shut behind her. Evelyn screamed, dropping the toy, and scrambled for the door. When she finally opened it, the hallway was no longer the same. The house was shifting, alive. Evelyn tried to retrace her steps but found herself in an unfamiliar room filled with antique furniture covered in white sheets. A gramophone in the corner began to play on its own. The tune was eerily cheerful, clashing with the dread that gripped her. From the corner of her eye, Evelyn saw movement. A figure wrapped in shadow stood at the edge of the room, its head tilted unnaturally. It raised an arm, pointing toward her. The gramophone's music distorted into a maddening cacophony as the figure advanced. Evelyn bolted out of the room, her heart pounding. She found herself in the basement. The walls were damp and etched with strange symbols glowing faintly in the dark. In the center of the room was a well, its cover broken and leaning. A low, guttural noise echoed from within. Against her better judgment, Evelyn stepped closer. She peered into the abyss. Two pale hands shot out, grabbing the edge. A head followed, eyeless and grinning, its mouth unnaturally wide. Evelyn stumbled back as the thing began to crawl out. She fled up the stairs, but the house wouldn't let her leave. Doors slammed, walls shifted, and a chorus of whispers grew louder, chanting her name. Exhausted and terrified, Evelyn found herself back in the hallway with the mirror. Her reflection wasn't her own. It was smiling, dark, hollow eyes staring back. The reflection mouthed words she couldn't hear. Then, it stepped out of the mirror. The shadow grabbed Evelyn, pulling her into the mirror. Her screams echoed as she vanished, leaving the house in silence once more. Days later, villagers noticed lights in the windows of the house. A new reflection adorned the mirror in the hallway. Evelyn, now one of the shadowed entities bound to the curse of Raven Hill. Evelyn awoke to darkness. She was lying on cold, damp floorboards, and the air around her was thick and oppressive. She vaguely remembered the mirror and the thing that had pulled her in. Now she was somewhere else, inside the house, but different. The walls seemed alive, pulsating faintly, and the ceiling stretched infinitely into blackness. A faint sound of scratching drew her attention. She turned her flashlight toward the noise but found only an empty hallway. The scratching grew louder, coming from inside the walls. Then, a voice, a child's whisper. "Help us." Summoning her courage, Evelyn followed the sound, her footsteps echoing unnaturally. The hallway ended abruptly in a door. Carved into the wood was a crude symbol, a triangle within a circle, surrounded by jagged lines. Her trembling hand reached for the doorknob. It was icy cold. Inside, the room was small, almost claustrophobic, with shelves lined with dusty jars filled with unidentifiable objects. In the center of the room stood an ancient writing desk. Upon it lay a journal, its cover cracked and worn. Evelyn flipped it open. The handwriting was frantic, the words barely legible. "They come from the mirror. They steal your shadow first, then they take the rest." A sudden knock echoed from the door she had just entered. Slowly, the doorknob began to turn. She grabbed the journal and ran. The house shifted around her again. Stairs appeared where none had been before. Desperate to escape, she climbed them, the journal clutched tightly in her hand. She found herself in an attic, lit by a dim, unnatural glow. The room was filled with cobwebs and dust-covered furniture. In the corner, an antique crib rocked slowly back and forth, though no one was near it. Evelyn approached, her flashlight shaking. Inside the crib was a small porcelain doll, its face cracked and its eyes following her. The doll whispered, "They're here." The attic door slammed shut, and the walls began to close in. She turned to the window, trying to break it open, but the glass reflected not the outside world, but the same room, only darker. In the reflection, dozens of shadowy figures surrounded her, watching. The reflection in the window spoke in unison. "Stay." Evelyn screamed and threw the flashlight at the window. The glass shattered, and the world outside returned, but it wasn't her world. She looked out onto an endless void, where fragments of the house floated like islands in a black sea. A low growl rumbled behind her. She turned to see one of the shadowy figures stepping closer. Its shape was human but wrong. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, and its face was featureless. It extended a hand toward her, beckoning silently. Evelyn backed away, clutching the journal. She flipped through its pages frantically, looking for answers. One passage caught her eye. "To break free, you must leave behind what they seek, your shadow. Without it, you can escape their grasp." The figure lunged at her, but she dodged, spilling a lantern onto the floor. Flames began to spread, consuming the dry wood of the attic. Evelyn pressed her back to the window, holding the journal tightly. She felt the house begin to quake. The fire roared louder, consuming the shadowy figure. But as the flames grew, so did the dark shapes in the room. They emerged from the walls, the floor, even the ceiling, converging on her. Evelyn made her choice. She stepped onto the windowsill, the void beckoning her. With one final glance at the burning attic, she let herself fall into the nothingness. She awoke back in the village, lying in a field near Raven Hill. The house was gone, replaced by scorched earth and ash. The journal lay open beside her, its pages now blank. She touched her face, her arms. Everything seemed normal. But as she stood, she noticed her shadow no longer followed her. In the days that followed, Evelyn tried to return to her normal life. But every reflection she passed now showed something lurking just behind her, watching. The house might have let her go, but it hadn't truly let her leave.